basic syntax you need to understand. Easy theory with examples. You have to know syntax, okay? If you are here, it is probably because you want to learn Latin, or maybe just because you need to learn syntax for school, whatever, okay? Even if you hate it, you need syntax. Every language has a grammar and a syntax, and to learn a language such as Latin, you need to at least understand, okay? Not learn a lot of definitions, a lot of concepts, no, just understand the basic syntax of your own language. So again, here we are going to be studying a basic English syntax so that you can understand Latin syntax, okay? So even if you don't plan to learn Latin, this is fine to start understanding English syntax. Okay. This is precisely what we are going to do in this extra lesson. Learn about the fundamental English syntax. For that, we'll explain the strictly necessary syntax. Notice all the italics, okay? Fundamental, strictly necessary, okay? With examples, and we'll give some tips to understand everything. Now, the grammar translation method, the Latin from Scratch course, is based on latinfromscratch.com, requires the knowledge of some basic syntax. But you really don't have to worry. Most of the stuff you might have struggled with at school is superfluous. And now, like, I know that many teachers, professors, linguists, etc. will be throwing stones at me or whatever. It doesn't matter. This is like what I consider to be true. So most of the stuff you have learned at school is superfluous, and we will not be spending time on that, but on knowing how to identify the fundamental types of phrases: subject, objects, direct, indirect, adverbials, etc. Okay? Before starting, it is important that you forget most of what you might have been taught about syntax. Okay? Mostly to identify the subject, you have to ask the verb, whatever. Okay? All of those? No. Especially forget the tips and tricks about asking the verb for information, etc. From now on, the only valid questions are the ones I say. Once again, and once again, notice that what we are about to study is basic syntax, and that the goal is not the accuracy of the concepts or any kind of erudition, but helping understand and heal syntactic trauma. So I was saying, we don't have to be learning by heart definitions, etc. We have to just understand. Okay, so we will start by this definition, because this is, I would say, this is the only definition which actually matters. So what is a phrase? Because we are going to be talking about phrases, okay? So phrases such as subject, direct object, indirect object, adverbials, etc. And also, first, what is a phrase? A phrase, also known as syntagm or syntagma or whatever, but in English, phrase, usually just phrase, okay? Is a group of words which appear together because they have the same function: subject, object, attribute, etc. Sometimes, however, because I said here is a group of words, usually it is going to be a group of words, but sometimes a phrase can consist of only one word. So for example, here we have John is tall. So John is one word and is already a phrase. Is also a phrase, and tall is also a phrase. So all of these, like each of the word, is one phrase, one phrase, one phrase. Okay. Other times, a phrase can be made up of quite a lot of words. So for example, here we have the neighbor who lives upstairs is tall. So if you notice, like the neighbor who lives upstairs is kind of equivalent to just John. No? So John is tall, the neighbor who lives upstairs is tall. So this is the subject, but also this is the subject. And of course, a phrase can contain other phrases, which can contain other phrases, etc. Like in theory, you can like these Russian dolls, let's say, no, like you put like this matryoshka, no, like you put a matryoshka inside of another matryoshka, etc. No, so it works the same. So, for example, here we have the neighbor who lives upstairs. So, and we said that this is the subject. This is the subject. But now, inside the subject, there is this other phrase, and then inside this phrase, there is this other phrase, etc. Like you could have, like, I mean, depending on how long the whole phrase is, you can put other phrases inside the main phrase. Okay? So that's what a phrase is. Okay? A word, or most usually, a group of words which work together with the same syntactic function, such as subject, direct object, indirect object, attribute, adverbial, etc. And now we are going to be studying each of the basic types of phrases. And of course, we start from the bottom, or from the most basic one, which is the subject. Now, from now on, I'm not going to be saying what is the subject or what is the direct object, etc., because it really doesn't matter what it is. And also because even like actual linguists don't agree on what these phrases are. Like there are many definitions of these things. And to give you like the school definition, which is worth nothing, is pointless. Okay, so it doesn't matter what these are. What matters is how to identify. Okay, so how to identify the subject? You might have been told you have to ask the verb who or whatever. So no, we don't ask the verb who. This works many times, but not always. Okay, and by many times, I don't know, maybe like 70% of the times, but so no, we don't ask who. Then also notice that, because some like trick is to say like, okay, so the first phrase is the subject. Sometimes yes, but some other times no. So it is not necessarily the first phrase in a sentence. Quite often it is, but not always. We can't always trust the method of checking with a pronoun, which is another usual trick which is explained. No, like we have to, I mean, if you change, no, for example, John is tall. So John, we can exchange it for he. And because he is a subject pronoun, that means that John is the subject. And that works in that case, but in many cases it doesn't work. We are going to see, okay? So, for example, here we have, my friend gave this to me. So my friend is the subject. Okay, that's quite basic. And it is true, no, that here it is the first phrase of the sentence. It is true that it is, we can change it for my friend, so who, no? So who, if we ask the verb who, it answers, no? Who gave this to you? My friend. So yeah, it is true that many times all of these tricks work, but not always, okay? Now, I saw him, or I saw Mike. Mike and him are the same, no? I saw him, or I saw Mike. Who did you see? Okay, so here we see that who, if we ask who, the answer would be, who did you see? I saw Mike. I saw him. So in this case, the answer to who is not the subject, because the answer to who would be him or Mike, which is the direct object. So here, no. Here you see that the subject is I. Who did you see? I. No. Okay, it doesn't work. Now, me and him were just like best friends. Of course, like, let's say purist teachers might tell you that you shouldn't say me and him. You should say I and he. Or actually, like, you should say he and I. Okay, but I mean, that's the theory, okay? Like, you should say this. But in real life, many people, of course, depends on the context, etc., many people will actually say me and him. So again, and here we see that strictly these are object pronouns, but they refer to the subject. Okay, so this thing of exchanging what we think is the subject for a subject pronoun, it doesn't always work, because here we should have said he or I and he, but many people say me and him. Okay, so also like that trick doesn't work. Now, who gave this to you? Him. It was him. No? So again, here it is actually the subject. Who gave this to you? And we would answer, he gave this to me. So he is also the subject. But then if we answer like this, him, it was him. Technically, this would also be the subject, no? Him gave this to me, or him gave this to you, whatever, no? Him. But you see that it doesn't fit, no? It doesn't fit. So that's why all of these questions, all of these tricks are so dangerous, because in theory, in an ideal world, they should work, but not really, okay? So that's why we have to be careful with all of this. So how do we identify the subject? How do we actually, really, in the real world, identify the subject? First, you may try using subject-verb agreement. Very important, okay? Subject-verb agreement. The subject and the verb should have the same grammatical person. Now, what is this word, agreement? So, agreement is pretty much that the subject and the verb agree. And what does that mean? That the subject and the verb should have the same grammatical person, first, second, third, and number, singular, plural. Okay, that's what we mean by subject and verb agreement. So, consider, I am, you are, he, she, it is. So you see that because I is first person singular, the verb is in first person singular. Because you is second person singular or plural, are is second person singular or plural. He, she, it is third person singular, so the verb is in third person singular, etc. Okay? So that's the concept of subject-verb agreement. This is easier to check in the present tense or in simple past with the verb to be, because you see that in the verb to be, like there are many forms, but for example, if we say eat, no, the verb eat, so it would be I eat, you eat, only he eats, but then we eat, you eat, they eat. So you see that in English like this is not very easy to use. No, but let's see. My friend gives this to me. So we see my friend is third person singular. So gives is singular with this is that marks the present singular, third person present singular. No, my friend gives. Now, if we change this, which is singular here, to plural, then the verb has to change for the, because of the subject-verb agreement. So my friend gives, but my friends give. That means that my friend and my friends is the subject. Now, me and him, we said before, no? Like this is not the subject, or this shouldn't be the subject because we are using object pronouns. However, it is the subject, even if we are using object pronouns. So me and him, like more correct, would be I and he. Huh? But still, doesn't matter. Me and him were eating out. Now, if we change what we think is the subject for some other subject, I. So now, were has to change to was. Huh? So me and him were eating, I was eating. Okay, so this is subject-verb agreement. And of course, also notice how in the structure there is, there are, what follows is the subject. No? So here, notice because usually we say, okay, so the subject is what goes first, like the first phrase in the sentence. Not always, okay? And of course, in questions, the subject usually goes after the verb, like the auxiliary verb, etc. And also, here is another example when the subject is not the first phrase of the sentence. So there is a window. There are many windows. So we see is, are, it changes because this changes. No? So this is singular, so this is singular. This is plural, so this is plural. Okay? So this is the subject. Now we go back to something that I mentioned before, like very lightly. However, since verbs in English have lost most of their conjugation, you might need something else, because we were saying, no, I eat, you eat, he eats, but then we eat, etc. No? However, since when changing a sentence into a question, we have different types of results. Let's see. Now, with this thing of transforming a positive sentence into a question. So what happens? My friend gave this to me. Who gave this to you? So we see, oh, this is the subject. This is the subject. Now, I saw him, or I saw Mike. Who did you see? No, so now we see that this is the subject. This is still the subject. Now, who saw Mike? Okay, so depending on the order, depending on what we are asking about, because who did you see? This refers to Mike, and this you refers to I. But here, who refers to I, because of course Mike refers to Mike, no? So depending on like the angle, like what we are exactly asking about, we might be asking about the object, or we might be asking about the subject. And depending on what we are asking about, the order of the pronoun in the question will be different. No? So when we ask, now this is important, when we ask about the subject, then the pronoun which refers to the subject is the first. And you see that there is no auxiliary verb. It's just like directly the main verb. No? So who gave? We don't say who did give. No? Who gave this to you? Now, here we also are asking about the subject. So again, who, first word, the subject, and then saw. No? Who did see? No? But here, because we are not asking about the subject, we are asking about who, Mike, who refers to Mike. No? So the subject is you. And now, because we are not asking about the subject, we need this D. We don't say who you saw, no? Who you saw, I don't know. So who did you see, no? So when we are not asking about the subject, we need the auxiliary. When we are asking about the subject, we don't need auxiliary, and the subject is first in the question, no? Or my dog is running. So my dog, of course, is the subject. And now, is my dog running? So now we see that my dog is running. Now, in this kind of, when we already have an auxiliary in the positive sentence, the auxiliary like goes here, no? So that's why is my dog running? No, this is still the subject. Okay, so these are like ways to check, depending on if we have to invert the order, or what we are asking about exactly, etc. Okay, so of course, I know that this might be a lot of information, so it is a good idea, once you have finished the whole video, to go again from the beginning, and you will understand everything better. Then we have what I prefer to call the attribute, also known as subject complement or subject predicate. There might be other names. All of them are fine. I just prefer attribute, okay? But you can call it whatever you like. So the attribute appears mostly with the verb to be. Now, there are like other definitions, like other grammars might say that the attribute also appears with other types of verbs, etc. But now let's just focus on this, okay? The attribute appears with the verb to be, usually right after it. The structure of this verb is almost always the following. First, we have the subject, then we have the verb to be, and then we have the attribute, whether it is an adjective or a noun. So the attribute can be any, an adjective or a noun or a pronoun. So, for example, here we have, my dog is smart. Of course, my dog is the subject, then we have the verb to be, and then we have the attribute. The attribute here is an adjective. Now, a dog is an animal. So here we have a dog is the subject, is the verb to be, and an animal, we see that it is a phrase with a noun. So noun, okay? So that's pretty much the attribute, okay? The complement which goes after the verb to be. However, there is an important exception. If what follows begin with a preposition, notice that this is not a preposition, okay? This is an article, it's not the same. If what follows begin with a preposition and refers to a place, then it is not the attribute, but an adverbial of location. We are going to talk about adverbials a bit later, okay? So for example, if we say, my dog is in the garden, this in the garden is not the attribute, because we see that it begins by a preposition and it refers to a place, to a location. So this is not the attribute. It is an adverbial of location. Of course, my dog is the subject, this is the verb to be, but there is this exception, important exception, okay? And that's it. That's everything you have to know about the attribute. Then we have the direct object. You have heard me already talk about two types of objects, the direct and indirect. So first, let's start with the direct object. The direct object is the obligatory complement, so obligatory complement of a type of verb called transitive. Learn this. Now, you don't really have to say, oh my God, what is transitive? Just this, okay? Transitive verb requires a direct object. In transitive verb, and notice that I don't say doesn't require. I say doesn't admit. Okay? Intransitive verb doesn't admit a direct object. Okay, so transitive requires, intransitive doesn't admit. So pretty much, transitive has direct object, intransitive doesn't have a direct object. Just okay. The direct object is not what receives the action directly. Like this is the typical definition that teachers say, no? So what is the direct object? What receives the action directly. What does that even mean? I mean, what does it mean to receive the action directly? It doesn't mean anything, okay? So that's why it doesn't matter, like the definitions don't matter, okay? We don't care what it is. We care about how to find it, how to identify, okay? And we definitely don't ask the verb what or even whom, okay? Also because many English-speaking people don't really know the difference between who and whom, etc. So if we don't know that, we cannot use it, okay? So let's say why we shouldn't be asking these things to the verb. What hit you? What hit you, no? And this what is the subject. What hit you? Because what hit you? So the rock hit me. So the rock is the subject. Okay. So no, we see that if we ask what in here, we are referring to the subject, not to the direct object. What is that? Again, this is the subject. Okay, so no. And then whom, the problem with whom is that what I said, no, that many people don't even know the difference between who and whom. So we cannot use this question also because whom can only refer to people, but the direct object can be both people, animals, objects, etc. No? So no. We cannot be asking these things to the verb because they won't work always. So how do we identify the direct object? In many languages, this can be achieved by transforming the sentence into the passive voice. And the direct object of the active sentence becomes the subject of the passive version. So let's see it, okay? The dog is chasing the car. So here, preliminary analysis, we would say this is the subject, this, we just say verb, okay? And this seems to be the direct object. Okay, let's confirm it. We said if we transform this into the passive voice, it will be the car is being chased by the dog. So we see the direct object of the active, this is the active and this is the passive, no? Becomes the subject of the passive version. And that's exactly what happened here. Okay? This is the verb and this is the agent's complement. Whatever. Doesn't matter, okay? So yeah, because you see this, no? So yeah, the direct object becomes the subject of the passive. However, English has the peculiarity, which is not present in many other languages, but English has this peculiarity, okay, of admitting the indirect object as the subject of the passive. So, for example, you give a ring to me. So we analyze this, okay? So this would be the subject, this is the verb, this is an object, and this is another object, okay? Specifically, it would be direct object, and this is indirect object. Now, we said this should become the subject of the passive. And we could say, a ring was given to me by you. So a ring was given to me. Okay, and it actually works, no? Like here, a ring was given. Now, English also admits this to be the subject. I mean, depending on the sentence, etc., it might sound more or less natural, etc., but it is grammatically correct, okay? So, you give a ring to me. I am given a ring by you. So, we see that also the indirect object can be the subject of the passive voice in English, which means that we cannot rely completely on this trick of converting into the passive, and what becomes the subject of the passive is the direct object. Because yeah, here it is the direct object, I mean the subject is the direct object, but here also the indirect object is the subject. It's not like 100% bulletproof, this trick in English. In many other languages, for example, Spanish, Italian, etc., it is absolutely bulletproof, but in English, no, because there is this peculiarity that also the indirect object can become the subject of the passive voice. So, what now? This means that the usual trick is, in most languages, won't necessarily work in English if the verb is ditransitive. Remember that we said transitive has direct object. Intransitive doesn't have direct object. Now, what is ditransitive? It has both direct and indirect objects. Also, for example, here we have this, you give a ring to me. So this a ring is direct object, this indirect object. This verb has both direct and indirect, so this verb is ditransitive because it has both at the same time. Okay? So, what then? At least we can be sure of one thing. The direct object is never preceded by a preposition. Because notice that here you might probably have thought something like, I could also say this sentence, you give me a ring. But of course I did this on purpose. No? In English you can say both, you give me a ring or you give a ring to me. Both work in English. Now, why did I do it like this first? To prove this here, okay? So, you give me a ring. Because, for example, imagine, no? Like, we have this sentence, you give me a ring. First, of course, we have to identify the subject. And we know that this is the subject. Okay. Now, we have me, we know that this is a phrase, and we have a ring. We know that this is also a phrase. And we know, okay, let's assume that we know that both of them are objects, but we don't know which one is the direct and which one is the indirect. So, what do we do in these cases? Usually, like 90% of the times, the indirect object will refer to a person and the direct object will refer to a thing. But that's 90% of the times, okay? So, no? Now, in English, the indirect object can be without preposition, but also with preposition. Like the sentence means the same, but I mean, of course, this sentence means the same, no? You give me a ring or you give a ring to me. Still, this is the subject. And now, the indirect object, we can transform it like this, okay? So, me next to the verb or to me after the direct object, no? So, me to me, okay? So, this means that this is the indirect object because we can either say it without preposition next to the verb or with preposition like further from the verb. And if now we know that this is the indirect object, we know that this is the direct object. Okay, so that's how we have to be playing a bit, no? Pushing, pulling a bit until we identify phrases. And now, of course, we have to study in a proper way the indirect object. Now we have already said a lot of things about the indirect object, but now we have to study it like properly. No? This is the only difficult complement that we can identify by asking the verb to who or to whom. Okay, sometimes for who or for whom. Okay, so this is the only time that we ask something to the verb. Okay, by difficult complement, I mean that subject, direct, and indirect objects and attribute, those are like, let's say, the difficult complements to identify because there are many tricks like we have been seeing before. So this is the only time that we can actually ask the verb to who or to whom or for who or whom sometimes. No? So for example, I give the letter to the mailman. Okay, so if we ask to whom do you give the letter? To the mailman. Okay. So, of course, we could also say, like we saw before, I give the mailman the letter. Okay? Now, of course, we already know that the indirect object can appear without to, but in that case, it requires to be moved next to the verb. Okay? So, here we have the two options. I give the letter to the mailman or I give the mailman the letter. Both of them are the same. It's just about the order of the direct and indirect objects. And we already said with to in the end, I mean like after the direct object, without to next to the verb. And as I was saying, this doesn't really change the fact that we still can identify the indirect object with the question to who, to whom. To whom do I give the letter? To the mailman. Okay, so we can also use this this question. Okay, this is the only time that you can ask the verb to whom, sometimes for whom. Okay, the indirect object appears very often in ditransitive structures. Remember, ditransitive has both direct and indirect objects. So the indirect object appears very often in ditransitive structures where the verb needs both a direct and an indirect object, such as give something to someone. Okay, so we see that something, direct object, to someone, indirect object, or give someone something. So this thing that we said, no, someone to someone, indirect object, depends on the order. We were saying it a few times already. Also, ask something to someone, or ask someone something, tell, say, etc. No, all these types of verbs and their synonyms, etc. They have always ditransitive structures. With that, we have finished what I call the difficult complements, which happen also to be the most basic and important ones and the most frequent ones. So that's what there is. Not like the most difficult ones are the most frequent ones. Now, adverbials. Adverbials, sometimes called circumstantial complements, as far as I know, in English it's much more frequent to call them just adverbials. But you can also find them as circumstantial complements. Can be of several types and are easily identified through questions to the verb. So from now, like, we can also ask the verb. I mean, at least for the adverbials. The most important ones are the following. So I said that there are different types of adverbials. And how do we find what type of adverbial? I mean, of course, what is an adverbial? An adverbial is a phrase with a function similar to an adverb, okay? Now, what types of adverbials do we have? Manner, so we ask the verb how. So, how do you do this? You do this like this. So this like this is the adverbial of manner. Instrument, with what? So with what do you cut bread? With a knife. Quantity, how many or how much? Cause, you ask why. Purpose or goal or finality, for what? Notice that many times these are not very easy to distinguish from one another. Okay, the cause and the purpose many times are hard to tell apart. But yeah, no? Why and for what? I mean, like philosophically, they are two very different questions, but in real life we mix them. Okay, but of course this is not a video about philosophy. So, cause, why, purpose, for what? Company, with whom? Time, when? And now place. We consider 4 types of place. The location, so where am I? I'm at home. Okay? So where? I'm standing here. No. Origin, from where? No, like from where are you coming? I mean, of course, but I'm always writing the preposition in front just to have some consistency. But it doesn't matter if you say from where or where from, of course. No. Direction, to where? So you see that origin is like this, direction is like this, and then through where? Like for example, I exit through the window. Whatever. No. Sometimes it is not easy to decide what exactly is the type of an adverbial. So for example, the police found the money with bloodhounds. So this with bloodhounds, what is exactly? Because it could be instrument. With what? No? With what did the police find the money? With bloodhounds. But maybe also could be company. No? I mean, bloodhounds are not exactly whom, but could also be company. Or it could even be how, manner, no? Like, how did they find the money? With bloodhounds. Okay, so sometimes it is not easy to say exactly what type of adverbial. There is really no need to obsess. Okay, there's really no need to obsess over this, as often it's a semantic matter rather than a syntactic one. So, I mean, many times, most of the times, it is obvious that it is this type of adverbial. In specific situations, such as this example, it is a bit more unclear. It doesn't matter so much. Then we have the prepositional complement. You might find it with other names, etc. It doesn't matter, okay? I call it prepositional complement because I think it's quite easy to understand what it is, no? We use this name to refer to an obligatory complement of verbs which require a preposition. That's why prepositional, no? So it's an obligatory complement. Remember that we said the direct object is an obligatory complement, okay? So we can think of it as a direct object because it's an obligatory complement, but with a preposition, okay? So just that. some of these verbs actually can work with or without a preposition with pretty much the same meaning, okay? So we trust in love. So here in love would be a prepositional complement because it is the obligatory complement of trust, but with a preposition. But then, for example, we could also say, we trust you, and that would be direct object. And trust is the same verb pretty much, no? So sometimes, no, like I say here. Then, children believe in monsters. So again, we could say, children believe you. Some analysis consider that the preposition is part of the verb, not part of the complement. So in my analysis, well, this is the subject, this is the verb, and this is the prepositional complement. But there are other analyses which are also perfectly fine, which is like this. This is the subject, this is the verb, this is the verb, sorry, and this is the object. Whatever. I mean, in this case, it doesn't make sense to consider prepositional complement. I mean, for our purposes, I prefer this analysis, okay? So prepositional complement is like an obligatory complement, like the direct object, but with a preposition. And now, careful. Notice that these are not the same as the complements of phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs such as put out. No? So, for example, we have here, no? Put out that cigarette. So, here, this is the verb, okay? And this is the direct object. And now, we could have thought something like put is the verb, out that cigarette is the prepositional complement. We might have thought that, but no, okay? In this case, this analysis is not correct. Why? Because even though there is like what seems to be a preposition here, now involved, preposition, 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 but it doesn't work in the same way because this is a phrasal verb. Why is this a phrasal verb and this is not a phrasal verb? Because phrasal verbs are verbs such as this that you can actually separate the verb with the preposition. No? So put that cigarette out. No? Like we can say both. Put out that cigarette or put that cigarette out. So if we can do this together or separate it, that means that this is a phrasal verb. And in that case, we don't consider all these prepositional complements, etc. Now, notice that here we couldn't say children believe monsters in. No, it doesn't make sense. No, so this is not a prepositional phrasal verb. Sorry, this is just like a normal verb with a prepositional complement. And here, this is a phrasal verb with a direct object. So to make it clear, prepositional phrasal verb. The whole thing is a verb, and it can be separated or together. In that case, like this, we just consider both verbs, both words to be one verb, even if it's two words. And here, it's like a normal verb with a prepositional complement. And the main difference is that here we can separate, here we cannot separate. And last, the complement of the noun. Again, you can find it with other names. I call it like this, complement of the noun, because it's quite clear what it means. Most of the times, the complement of the noun is a non-obligatory phrase that we could translate with the preposition of, and which is dependent on a noun, not a verb, because until now, we were saying that the complements were complements of the verb. Now, this is specifically complement of the noun. No? So it depends on, it is dependent on a noun, not a verb. Okay? Quite often it can be expressed through the Saxon genitive. Saxon genitive or with the preposition of. Let's see what this means, okay? In case that you don't know already what the Saxon genitive is. So it usually expresses some idea of possession, belonging, or similar. So for example, The phone of my father. No? So here we have like this preposition of. So the phone of my father is broken. Of course, it doesn't sound very natural in English, no? But my father's phone is broken. No, I mean, of course, this sounds more natural in English, but you see that it's the same. It's the same. No? The phone of my father is broken. My father's phone is broken. The boyfriend of my sister is a firefighter. My sister's boyfriend is a firefighter. So when of my father or my father's or of my sister's refers to a person, usually we are going to use the Saxon genitive. This is the Saxon genitive, okay? This apostrophe and S. Now, the capital of Poland is Warsaw. We might say Poland's capital, but that already might sound not so natural. No, in this case, the capital of Poland sounds better than Poland's capital. And the door of my house is painted yellow. Would also sound kind of weird, no? My house's door, like this, no? We really don't know if we would say that. Probably we would just say of my house. So you see that there is this kind of continuum, like when it refers to people, we prefer my father's, my sister's, but then once it doesn't refer to people strictly, Poland, okay, Poland is like a country with people, so Poland's capital, the capital of Poland is like, I'm not super sure which one is better, maybe, but here definitely we know that of my house, a house is like a thing, no? So of my house. In any case, it doesn't matter, okay? It's just like, it can be like preposition of or Saxon genitive, so that is the complement of the noun, okay? Because this is complementing phone, my father's phone. So phone is a noun, and this is complementing phone, etc., etc. Here, boyfriend. Boyfriend is a noun, so of my sister is complementing the boyfriend. No, it's adding who is a boyfriend of my sister, etc. Sometimes a similar complement is actually a complement of the adjective. Okay, so most of the times it's going to be complement of the noun because it is complementing a noun. But sometimes it will be a complement of an adjective because it refers to an adjective. So for example, I am afraid of the dark. So this of the dark refers to afraid. No? And afraid, of course, is an adjective. So I am afraid of the dark. In that case, we would say that this is not a complement of the noun, but a complement of the adjective. Also notice that here it would definitely not work to say I am dark's afraid, no? Or anything like that. And sometimes a complement of the noun, we go back to the noun, okay? Complement of the noun can use other prepositions, okay? So most of the times it's going to be either of or Saxon genitive, but some other times it can be other prepositions. So for example, we say the door of my house, we could also say the door to my house is always open for you. And they kind of mean the same, but there is like some little change of meaning, no? Somehow. The door of my house, the door to my house is always open for you, okay? What we have been learning is the basic syntax. I say this again. This is the basic syntax. That is how to identify the most important phrases. We still need to learn about other types of phrases, predicative complements, appositions, etc. But I don't consider those essential at the beginning, at least. No? So this is what we need to know from the beginning, what we need to understand from the beginning. And of course, the syntax of sentences, subordinate clauses, etc. No? We have seen only the simple sentences, okay? The complements of simple sentences. But if you understand everything that we have studied in this video, you already know more, much more than most people. And I said this already. Now that you have watched this video, go and watch it again, because in the second time, you are going to be understanding everything much better.